I've got a little brain teaser for you today. Do we think that this output will be true or false? Have you got it yet? Find out in a minute. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the type system in Terraform, if you hadn't already guessed by the intro. This all started from a discussion in the Azure Verified Modules project, and there was a thread posted on one of the internal Teams channels from John, and then a few people chipped in, so thanks to Jared, Jason and Cesar for their inputs to this, and it uncovered some really, really useful things. And really interesting things as well, which we're going to talk about today. Things like the default types that Terraform uses for literals in the code, and the best way to use conditions for collection values. So we're going to have a bit of a golden rule thing again later on when we find out a little bit more about it. So stick around for that. I love how the Azure Verified Modules project is bringing like-minded people together and uncovering these idiosyncrasies in Terraform. And we're all working together to kind of create a better Terraform environment. So yeah, I really love the project, and thanks to everyone for their commitment and inputs. We're going to look at some real-world applications to this as well. It's not all theory. So back to the original point of constructing a request body using merge on objects. How do we do that effectively when talking about collection values, such as lists, sets, that sort of thing? So back to that question. Let's see what the answer is and why. Hi, here we are again in Visual Studio Code, where we're going to answer that question. Is var list string equal to empty list? Okay, so I've also added in list any in here for reasons that I'll come on to later. So good old terminal, Terraform plan. What do we think? Apparently it's not an empty list. Why the hell is that? So this confused me a little bit as well, and it was thanks to Jared's kind of intuition on the thread I've just been talking about, where he pointed out that actually behind the scenes we're talking about types here. So to add a bit more detail in here, let's look at the type of list string, and that is an explicit list string, and the default is that. But when we compare list string to that, we get false. Why is that? So let's just have a look at Terraform console. I think the first thing to do is use the type function, var.list string. That is a list of string, as you'd expect. Okay. So what about if I go type of an empty list? So that's a tuple or tuple. I never know how to say that word. But anyway, it's not the same type. So you can't compare those two things. So technically in a strongly typed programming language, those two things are not the same. So I'm sure if you used Python or something that, JavaScript or something that didn't really care, it would be happy with that. But we're using Terraform is ultimately type-based. So when we compare var.list string to that, we get false. Okay, so how can we fix that? If I go like that, does that work? It's also false. That's really confusing. So why is that? Why is that false? First of all, to find the answer to that, we have to look at the type of that value. To list and that. I've got that wrong. There you go. And the issue is that when we're using literals and stuff like this, it automatically assigns the type dynamic to the value, to the members of that collection. And a list of dynamic is not the same as a list of strings. This is really interesting because Terraform has a strongly typed variable system for its input. So you can say, this is a list of objects with this exact schema, and be really, really confident about that. As soon as you break into using locals or literals in your code, you have much, much less control over what the type system is. And therefore, you cannot compare them with the equals. This doesn't work. You can't be absolutely sure that it's going to give you the result you want. With string values, well, not just strings, with atomic values, so number, string, bool, that kind of thing, you can do that because there's not really, there's not any ambiguity into the type. So again, if we get a Terraform console, if I go type and I put empty string, it's going to say string, right? It's going to say string. So interesting. What happens if I put type null? Oops. Dynamic. Okay, there you go. So for atomic values, for primitive types, whatever you want to call them, you can make the comparison. So you can use the equals equals. So how do we do it with collection values? Well, with collection values, what we've got to do is we've got to use the length function. We've got to go, if we wanted to say, is it empty or not? We've got to do that. And that will work if it's a tuple, if it's a list, if it's a list of any type. Okay, so let's have a look at that now. Let's exit my Terraform console. Go Terraform plan. Is empty list is true. Okay, so let's just, and that works with list of any, right? That's also going to be fine as we'd expect. So we change that to is empty list, which is Terraform plan. That is also true. So let's just try some other types. Variable, empty map. Type is map. But any, doesn't really matter. And the default is empty. Okay, bar empty map. There you go. Let's see. I mean, technically, I need to rename the variable because it's rename the output because it's empty list. But hey, it's still true. I'm just going to call it is empty just to avoid confusion. So let's talk a little bit about tuples now. This is a definition of one. I've got a variable of a tuple, which is a value with a string, and a bool. Okay, and that can be null. So if I go Terraform plan, that's fine, it understands it. If I go Terraform console, I go var.tuple, it says it's null. Okay, if I go type of var.tuple, it should give me it's a tuple with those values. Okay, so a tuple can be null. That's fine. Can we have a tuple to be empty? Let's have a look. No, we can't. The default value is not compatible with the variable's type constraint. Okay, so can we have null, null, and null as the default value? Yes, we can. Okay, so now it's got our tuple value. So important lesson, tuples are not like lists in that they can be empty. They are either null or they are values of the type specified in the tuple schema. So that's okay. We can do that. So let's go back and put this back to some values. So let's say that's a string, and that's a bool. So let's have a look at that. So A, B, and false is our tuple value. So let's see what happens when we go back in here. So that's a valid value. So var.tuple is A, B, and false. Can we convert that to a list? Let's have a look. Yes, we can. But look what it's done. It has changed the Boolean to a string because all collections, all values in a collection of a list have to be of the same type. Whereas in a tuple, you can have basically any type you like in whatever order. But the tuple has to be that or nothing. You can't just add stuff on. So lists and tuples are somewhat interchangeable as long as there is an implicit type conversion between the tuple schema and the list member. That makes sense? It's a bit complicated, but let's show you an example now of something where that doesn't work, and because Terraform can't convert implicitly the members of the tuple, right? So I'm going to comment that out, and then I'm going to exit this, and I'm going to delete this because I've got my other complex variable here, which is a little bit more complicated. And this is really important because Terraform seems to assign the tuple type to things if it hasn't got anything else. So I've got a variable called tuple2, and it's a tuple, and the first value in the tuple is an object with a child object where the value of fizz is a string. Yeah, so we've got object, we've got foo equals object, we've got fizz equals string. And then next in the tuple is another object and bar equals number. So here is, sorry, delete that. Here is a default value for that tuple. So you should be able to see that we've got foo object fizz string equals a. Then we've got another one with bar equals 42. Okay, so it's a pretty complex data structure. So let's have a look at that. Well, it's happy with it, and I can go var.tuple2, and yeah, that gives me that. Can I convert that to a list? Let's have a look. No, it can't, because this error happens a lot, and it actually is one of the issues that's been raised on the Azure Regions module that I maintain by the Azure Terraformer himself, Mark Tinderholt, and we got this error because it cannot convert a tuple to a list of any single type. That means that what it's saying is it can't, this and this have to be the same type for it to be a valid list, and they can't be implicitly converted in a way that satisfies that. So you do watch out for that. Golden rule, I guess, is to try and add toList, toSet, toMap type functions inside your locals to try and be as explicit as you can with the types that Terraform is using, because otherwise you might run into this stuff behind the scenes. So I promised you a real world example. This is simulating what you might do if you're using AZ API and constructing the properties bag for a resource. In this scenario, I've got a notional variable called extensions, which is a list of string. I then have my properties, which I'd normally be sending to the resource. And I'm using a merge function. So these are the standard properties that I want to always put in. And this is an optional property where I'm saying if var extensions is equal to an empty list, even though we know that's not an empty list, that's a tuple, then put null. I don't want you to include it. However, if it's not, then add this extra bit in. So what I want is for it not to include this baz attribute at all when in this configuration when that is empty. However, as we know it's going to, and you can see I've just run a Terraform plan before, so if I just do a Terraform plan again, it's actually included that, and I don't want it to, and that actually can be problematic when you're dealing with data. There is a very real difference between null. There can be a real difference between null and an empty list, or an empty, yeah, this would be in JSON, so it'd be an empty list. So what can we do to fix that? And this is really, really interesting because actually it works fine one way around. But what we should do, as we know, we should use the length function. So in here, we should put length of our extensions is not equal to, or if it does equal 0, oops, then we want null. If not, do that. So that subtle change means that we don't get it, and that's correctly done the output because it's excluded that. So let's just test that the other way. So let's just put a value in there and run that again, and you can see that it now correctly constructs the output because we have used the correct logic and we've obeyed the golden rule, which is if we've got collection values and we want to use conditions on them, then use length. Hopefully that kind of solidifies in a more real way how you might use this in the real world when writing your modules. Now, let's wrap this up. So let's wrap up what I think has been a really, really interesting journey through the Terraform type system. Let's summarize some of the key takeaways. The first is if you need to find out if a collection value is empty or not, do not use the literal empty list or empty set denomination, because behind the scenes, Terraform will think that that is a tuple. It also doesn't, you're not able to specify the type of the element of that list. So if you try and compare a list of string variable and you want to see if it's empty or not, if you just put, even if you put toList function and then put the empty list, you'll be comparing a list of strings to a list of dynamics, and that will always say false. The golden rule is to use the length function, as pointed out by Jared internally on our chat. So thanks for that. The next one is tuples converting into lists. So we've learned that tuples can either be null or they have to have a value. You can't just, they're not like lists in that you can just find out how, you can't just add values onto the end. They're a specific fixed structure. Now, they can be converted into lists where you can do list type operations on them, such as add another member, but they can only be converted to lists if there's an implicit type conversion available for each member of the tuple. Now, I showed you an example where, a simple example where that's fine. You can convert a bool to a string, and therefore it could convert a tuple with non-matching types to a list with matching types because of the implicit type conversion. So instead of the Boolean value false, we got a string that said false. However, that only gets you so far, because as soon as you get into more complex data structures, it's likely that you will hit up against this situation where Terraform is unable to perform that implicit type conversion, and then you'll get the error it's unable to convert into a single type. So again, the guidance that I can give you is, wherever possible in your Terraform code, use the toList, toSet, whatever functions to try and steer Terraform down the road of creating the right type behind the scenes in the first place. Do that as early as possible to avoid the errors that you've seen today. So one of the things that is not in Terraform at the moment, but I think would be really cool, is type assertions for locals. So this, I don't know if anyone else thinks this is a good idea. Let me know in the comments below if you think this is useful. But if we look here, if we have a local, at the moment you can say my local equals what we think is an empty list, but it's not actually, it's a tuple. So what would be cool is if we used a type system like maybe they're using Go, and you could put my local dot, and then you could say list string. That would enable you to tell Terraform specifically what type this local had, and therefore would make your life a lot easier. I would love to have this feature in Terraform. If you think it's interesting too, let me know. As always, please give us a like and a subscribe if you like the content and want to support what I do. Love to hear what you have to say in the discussion below. Take care, and I will see you next time.